Dan Lennington is standing by from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty with a 12th lawsuit against the Biden-Harris administration in yet another game of legal whack-a-mole on the racist policies coming out of this administration. Dan, it's wonderful to have you back on the program. What would we do without Will? I know we would be stewing in a legal maze of pure discrimination and racism if it weren't for you guys. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Vicki. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So here we go again, right? I mean, how many times have you sued the Biden-Harris administration saying you can't discriminate based on skin color when it comes to taxpayer money? But here's the latest. U.S. Department of Education's grant program called the McNair Post Baccalaureate Achievement Program that offers $60 million says if you're white or Asian or Middle Eastern, and in some cases Hispanic, you don't get to apply for this.
Yeah, this is this is actually a program I found out about because of my son, who happens to be in college right now. And this is a program for kids in college who are interested in going to graduate school, but they're not exactly sure how to get to graduate school, what they want to do in graduate school. And so universities who get federal money for this program, they pair up students with professors who act as mentors and counselors. They get them in research projects. They get them paid internships, and they guide these students towards graduate school, which is fantastic. It's a great program. But written in the law, it says this is for blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, and some other Native Hawaiians and Native Alaskans. So if you are anywhere from any other country, you don't get a preference. You're not allowed to participate in this program. And so we were contacted by Young America's Foundation, which is headed by Scott Walker now. And there are two students, one from North Dakota and one from UW-Madison, who actually emailed their university financial aid people and said, hey, I'd like to be involved in this program because not only do you get this assistance with going to graduate school, they give you money. They give you up to $5,000. And so, hey, we would like this money. We're interested in going to graduate school. And they got these students, Avery and Ben, they got emails back that said, I'm sorry, you're white. You can't participate in this program.
Wow.
And
sorry,
so
you're white.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're white. You can't apply. And by the way, it's blacks, Native Americans, and Native Alaskans. How are we determining, are we doing a one-drop blood test here on black or Native American? I mean, if you're a quarter black, does that qualify? What if you're three-quarters white? Does that preclude you from making an application? I mean, really, Dan, this is kind of not only offensive, illegal, discriminatory, racist, but it's also kind of silly.
It is silly, and anytime you draw racial lines, you're making horrible mistakes. Like this law, for example, says Hispanic. Well, Hispanic means that you derive from a country that has a Spanish origin. So, for example, if you're from Brazil, you are not Hispanic because Brazil is not a Spanish origin country; it's a Portuguese country. Or if you're from Guyana, which is a French country, or Belize, which is an English-speaking country. Or any of those, many of those islands in the Caribbean, Central and South American countries, they don't have Spanish origin, so they are not technically Hispanic. So anytime you draw these lines, you're sort of making a fool of yourself. So another issue is that, they say black, but there are people who are from Africa who would be excluded because they're from North Africa. They're Moroccans or Egyptians or other type of Arabs. And so even, they want to they would like to help Gazans, I'm sure, because they're supposedly victimized in this war by the Israelis. But Gazans would be excluded. Israelis would be excluded. Unless you're on the list, you're excluded. And this just shows that whenever you draw lines about races, you're demeaning people because you're saying your only importance in this world is your racial category. That's what we're interested in. And that is offensive and bigoted.
So, Dan, the U.S. Supreme Court had yet another ruling that said you can't make these kind of determinations based on skin color. Again, this was last summer. So do they just ignore the Supreme Court? With Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, in multiple different instances, I recall a grant program for farmers where white farmers were not allowed to apply. You won that one. So does the Biden-Harris administration just say, oh, well, we'll get rid of that program, but we're going to keep all these other ones online, and we're going to create more, and we're going to make groups like you sue us for every single program, despite a Supreme Court decision that has the logic that should eliminate all of these discriminatory practices, and multiple lawsuits, not just by your group?
It's as if Brown versus Board of Education was one, and then the Topeka schools were desegregated. But then every other school district said, well, you're going to have to sue us. You're going to have to sue us. We're going to, one at a time, we're going to go through this. Because that's what's happening. There's over 70 programs at the federal level that discriminate based on race, that dole out money to small businesses or individuals or students. They dole out contracts based on race, over 70. There's a couple dozen in Wisconsin that are on the books, and they're still being administered every day. There's, different cities, city of Milwaukee, and localities have them. There are billions of dollars going out the door every year based on race. And what these defendants have said, these government agencies have said, basically come and take it. So we've got to go brick by brick and dismantle this DEI with the federal system and the state system and the local systems, and then the private companies. And we're just going to have to do it the hard way. They want to do it the easy way or the hard way. We're going to do it the hard way.
Well, they're making you do it the hard way, and they're making you spend your hard-earned resources on this as well, because, Will is a nonprofit organization. You don't charge people when you take up their case and challenge the constitutionality of the government. I will say this, though, and they won't. They will go kicking and screaming, but with regard to the private sector, messages have started to work. I don't know if you've been paying attention to Robbie Starbuck and what his activist organizations have been doing, targeting some of the largest companies in the United States, whether it's Harley Davidson, whether it's John Deere, Ford Motor Company, and getting results because they don't want exposed their despicable, weaselly, acquiescence to this discriminatory and racist practice.
Yeah, and we will have gone after private companies, and we will continue to. We've gone after NBC, Universal, Comcast, gone after hospitals. Hospitals are a big problem right now. All the hospitals in Wisconsin are involved in health equity and it's in discriminatory practices. And there are, and I'll tell you, if you're in a company, private company with, say, like more than 5,000 employees in Wisconsin, there's a very high chance that there is race discrimination going on in the hiring and promotion practices. And we've been getting very recently leaks from some very prominent Milwaukee-based companies. We're not quite sure, we're not ready to disclose them yet, but some very prominent Milwaukee-based companies that are discriminating, and they're trying to racially balance their workforce.
Go get them.
They're saying there's not enough of this group, there's not enough blacks, there's not enough. You can't do that. You can't racially balance.
No.
That is demeaning and that's offensive.
So if you are someone out there, and we can't promise that Will has enough attorneys to address everybody, but if you're someone out there from a larger company, and you have knowledge of DEI, race-based discrimination, illegal, this is in violation of federal law, reach out, will-law.org, because you may not be able to take up a specific case, Dan, right? But if the right case comes along, you're going to need a complainant.
Yeah, and it's going to be very expensive for these companies. That's why a lot of companies are dropping this stuff like a hot potato because
yes,
at the end of the day, a lot of these companies actually receive federal funds in the form of contracts, or they've received PPP, they receive COVID relief, and that means that they promise not to discriminate based on race. And if they are discriminating based on race, they're essentially defrauding the federal government. And so there could be quite a lot of financial responsibility to these companies under the False Claims Act for some of the things that they're doing.
Indeed.
Not to mention just employees suing them for class actions in employment discrimination.
So what we've seen so far, Robbery Starbuck Tractor Supply Company, John Deere, Harley Davidson, Ford Motor Company. I'm not sure who else is in the hopper, but just the exposure has been enough to at least get them to say we're rolling back on our discriminatory practices. Dan Lennington, thank you very much for joining me on the program.
Thank you.
Good to have you, and we will take a quick break on the Vicki McKenna Show.